The rise of reform. The 1890s weren't just another decade, they were a battlefield or a battleground. The country stood at a crossroads, caught between the unchecked greed of the Gilded Age and the rising cries of those who refused to be silent. Industrial tycoons hoarded wealth while workers toiled in factories, suffragists fought to be heard, and black activists risked their lives demanding justice. Reconstruction had crumbled, but the dream of equality hadn't died. Instead, it burned hotter, fueling movements that would shake the foundations of power. This is a story of defiance, a story of those who refuse to accept exploitation as fate. We'll walk in the footsteps of women demanding the ballot, farmers uniting against the stronghold of monopolies, truth tellers exposing the horrors of lynching. We'll witness the birth of the progressive movement, a surge of reform that aimed to rein in the excesses of capitalism and expand democracy. But progress has never been simple. For every step forward, there was always a cost. For every reform, a resistance. The stars are aligning, the oracles are speaking, and history is watching. The echoes of resistance still ring today if we are willing to listen. Welcome to Orbits and Oracles, a Griot Sky to history. By 1890, the American economy was teetering on the edge of corporate rule. Titans like Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan had turned industries into empires, crushing competition, dictating prices and bending politicians to their will. For small businesses, farmers, and workers, there was no such thing as fair play, just the cold reality of a rigged system. Enter John Sherman, an unlikely champion of economic justice. A conservative Republican from Ohio, Sherman wasn't a radical. He believed in capitalism, but not the kind where a handful of men controlled the entire industries. He saw monopolies for what they were, a direct threat to democracy. If left unchecked, the country would cease to belong to the people and instead become a playground for the rich and ruthless. With public outrage growing and pressure mounting, Sherman and President Benjamin Harrison pushed forward a bold new law, the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was the first federal attempt to take on the trust, declaring illegal any business practices that restrained trade or sought to create monopolies. The language was broad, too broad at first, but the foundation had been laid. At first, enforcement were weak. The courts sided with the powerful, and corporations found clever ways to sidestep the law. But history doesn't move in straight lines. The act would later serve as the hammer that shatters Standard Oil in 1911 and set the stage for future battles against unchecked corporate powers. Now, Sherman didn't live to see the full impact of his fight. He died in 1900, but his legacy endures. His law remains a cornerstone of economic fairness, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming corporate power, the will of the people can still shape the future because history isn't just something that happens, it's something we make. By 1890, the Lakota Nation, once sovereign, once powerful, had been forced onto desolate reservations, surviving on government rations that barely sustained life. Hunger, disease, and betrayal had taken their toll, but in the darkest moments, hope flickered. The ghost dance rose among the people, a spiritual movement that carried prayers of revival, the return of the buffalo, the end of white rule, and a future free from shackles. The U.S. government saw something else, defiance. Sitting Bull, a warrior turned elder, was accused of inciting rebellion. On December 15th of 1890, U.S. authorities stormed his home on the Standing Rock Reservation. He never stood a chance. A scuffle broke out. The Lakota man, hired by the U.S. as Indian police, shot their own leader in the head. 2 weeks later, on December 29th of 1890, Chief Bigfoot and his band, Cold and Desperate, were intercepted near Wounded Knee Creek, South Dakota. The U.S. military, jittery and eager to crush any sign of resistance, surrounded the Lakota with Hotchkiss guns, lethal weapons designed to rip through flesh and bone. The order came, surrender your weapons. A shot rang out. No one knows who fired first. Then came the slaughter. U.S. soldiers unleashed hell, mowing down at least 250 unarmed Lakota men, women, and children. Some tried to run, but there was no escape. The snow, the open plains swallowed them whole. Those who survived the first onslaught were then hunted down and executed. Wounded Knee was not just a massacre, it was a message. The last flicker of armed indigenous resistance had been extinguished. The frontier, once wild and free, was now under U.S. control, but at the cost of thousands of lives and a world undone. As the 19th century closed, America's industrialists, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, built empires of steel and wealth. Meanwhile, the Lakota and countless other indigenous nations were left to reckon with broken treaties, stolen land, and the weight of a nation that had no place for them. They made us many promises, one Lakota survivor would say, but they kept only one, the promise to take the land. At the same time, another war was being waged, not with bullets, but with truth. In 1892, journalist Ida B. Wells turned her pen into a weapon, exposing the brutal reality of lynching in America. White mobs claimed these murders were about justice, but Wells revealed the truth. Black men were often lynched for economic success, political defiance, or simply existing. She faced death threats, was forced to flee Memphis, yet never stopped fighting. Even Booker T. Washington, advocating economic progress over protest, found himself at odds with Wells' relentless call for justice. And while Wells fought against injustice in the South, across the Midwest and West, farmers and workers were rising up. The populist movement, a coalition of struggling farmers, laborers, and small-town Americans, demanded economic reforms. An end to railroad monopolies, fair wages, and the free coinage of silver to break Wall Street's grip. Their champion, William Jennings Bryan. His 1896 Cross of Gold speech electrified the nation. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. But big money won the day. Republican William McKinney, backed by the wealthy elite, crushed Bryan in the election, and the populist dream faded into history. What does that lead us to? Imperialism and global power. By 1898, America stopped looking inward and turned its gaze beyond its borders. The Industrial Revolution had made the U.S. an economic powerhouse. Now, the U.S. wanted to be an empire. One man had a blueprint, Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan. His book, Influence of Sea Power Upon History, argued that great nations controlled the seas. The message: if America wanted to dominate the world, it needed a modern navy. And Congress listened. Steel battleships began patrolling the oceans and was ready for conquest. The first conquest? Hawaii, a thriving kingdom ruled by Queen Lakulehi, who sought to protect her people from U.S. business interests. But U.S. sugar planters had other plans. With backing from the U.S. government, they staged a coup in 1893, imprisoning the queen in her palace, and 5 years later, Hawaii was annexed, being considered a prize for America's growing empire. Next up, the Spanish-American War, the birth of an empire. Then came the spark that ignited America's imperial ambitions, the USS Maine. When the battleship exploded in Havana Harbor, the press, led by yellow journalists like William Randolph Hearst, blamed Spain without evidence. "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," became the war cry. Within months, the U.S. obliterated Spain's navy and claimed victory. The reward was Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The Platt Amendment ensured Cuba remained under U.S. control, while in the Philippines, American forces crushed a 3-year independence movement. The war had been quick, but the consequences lasted generations. So what's the takeaway? The Gilded Age wasn't just a time of steel and innovation. It was a paradox. One, progress, yes. Steel skyscrapers touched the sky, but factory workers toiled 12-hour shifts in brutal conditions. Conquests, yeah, we had those. America became a global power, but native lands were seized, and the Philippines became a bloody battleground. Reform, yeah, we had a little reform. The populist movement died, but it laid the foundation for the progressive era that follows. Going forward, as we move into imperialism, I need you to recognize and understand that history isn't black and white. The same forces that built America also oppressed others. We need to always remember as we're moving forward who gains power, who lost power, and what is left behind. Happy reading!